think we're gonna give like a few more minutes for folks to sign on. And Aaliyah, whenever you're ready, you can get started.
I'll give it maybe another 2 minutes and then I'll just start sharing my screen. Okay, I think just for the benefit of everyone, who's actually shown up on time, and also because you are all so gracious to give me an hour of your evening, which I know is sometimes a precious commodity, we're gonna just actually get started.
Hey,
So
Aaliyah.
Yeah.
I'm not assigned interpreter yet.
Oh,
okay, yeah, no problem. I'll just share the screen. So you let me know and then we can start. Absolutely.
I'm just gonna add you now, Myra. Give me 1 second. Sorry, y'all, technical difficulties. Okay, Mario should be assigned, and if you want to go ahead and explain interpretation, and then Aaliyah can start, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, I was saying folks won't be able to hear me if I'm assigned interpreter. But basically, if you need interpretation today, I will be providing it into Spanish. And when Elizabeth activates the interpretation function again, you will see a globe at the bottom left corner of your screen. And you can click on that and select interpretation into Spanish or English, just in case somebody does decide to come in and is a Spanish speaker and they want to share in Spanish, then you'll be able to listen to what they're sharing into English when I'm interpreting for them. And then also just a reminder for folks, if you will be speaking or sharing at any given time during the meeting, we do ask you to please speak at a moderate pace. If you catch yourself speaking too fast, or if I catch you speaking too fast, I'll let you know via the chat so you can slow down for a little bit. And that would be it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to assign the interpretation now. So just a reminder, like Myra said, if you are a monolingual English speaker, you'll want to click English with the globe. And if you're a monolingual Spanish speaker, you'll want to click Spanish. All right, I'm going to start the interpretation now. You should see the globe at the bottom of your screen. And you can go right ahead, Aaliyah, all yours. Thanks for your patience, y'all.
Okay, can everyone see the screen? Before I get into... Yes, okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so thank you all for joining me today to talk about, well, the training or the workshop is called Birds, Beads, and Bias. And this will just be a really, for me, a personal discussion with you all about what comprehensive sexuality education is, and also giving you some in-depth information about current legislation that's in New York State right now and what it all means. If I don't know if anyone has been aware of some of the articles that have been kind of floating around about the current legislation right now, the current bill. And so I'm part of the New York Civil Liberties Union, and also a part of a coalition called Sex Ed Now New York. And so because of a lot of misinformation and disinformation that is occurring right now, we really thought it was imperative to start having these forums with parents and other members of the community to really talk about especially talk about the ins and outs of this current bill. So that's where we're really going to go today. So I will also, with that spiel done, my name is Aaliyah Ansari. I am the Teen Health Strategist for the New York Civil Liberties Union. I'm also a sexuality educator. I have been for over 7 years teaching high school and middle school students comprehensive sexuality education throughout New York City. And as one can tell, and as you will all probably see throughout this hour, I'm a huge advocate for comprehensive sexuality education to be taught in all grade levels, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And so let's begin. So let's talk about the agenda. Very small agenda today. We're going to talk about what is comprehensive sexuality education. We're going to also talk about what is actually happening in New York, why it's important for us to actually start having these conversations. And we're also going to go a little bit about some sex ed beliefs and misconceptions, and also leave up to you all if you have any, further questions. We have a Q&A at the end. But also, please feel free, a facilitator, for you to unmute yourself and ask questions during the actual presentation too, because I think sometimes people kind of forget, and also I kind of actually put it in the chat because sometimes that can be a little bit, could be a little more distracting. Something I would prefer. Sorry. These bullet points, short what comprehensive sex means. I want to first and foremost that comprehensive sexuality education is health education. And it is very important education that young people deserve to have. And it encompasses a wide range of topics, not just, I think that's a big misconception that people have as well. And I understand because the word sexuality is in the term, but sexuality encompasses more than just the mechanic of having sex, right? Within comprehensive sexuality education, we're talking about young people being taught topics about human development, which includes things like puberty and reproduction. About them also learning personal skills like how to have healthy communication with sexual and romantic partners, but also how to have healthy communication with family and friends. We're also talking about establishing what healthy relationships actually like, and relationships too, not just sexual and romantic, but also familial relationships, as well as relationships with friends. Also a big part of comprehensive sexuality education is consent. I believe personally, and I also believe the Christian also believes that of what it actually is, for it to be what consent is, what that looks like, is about establishing healthy boundaries with people and within themselves to be able to have a conversation about whether or not comfortable with something. And we're talking about not just, but any type of circumstance or issue, right? I always use the example of if a partner, for example, how to for hugs and high fives, right? Something that I have even like students, and they seem like that's kind of weird, right? To have that conversation, start to understand that it's important for you.
Aaliyah.
Yes.
Sorry, you're a bit glitchy. You're kind of coming in and out. I'm not sure if it's just my mine as well, but it's kind of hard to hear you. You're kind of coming in and out.
Okay. To stop the video because that kind of helps a little bit.
Helps.
See my face?
Sometimes it does help.
What did you say? You able to hear me say at least the last?
It was kind of in and out throughout the first slide.
Yes. So, hopefully everyone will be able to.
Yeah, it's still glitchy. Okay, maybe I think she might have signed out and signed back in. Zoom! Welcome to Zoom. Thank you, Serge. Thank you so much. Thank y'all. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you so much for being so understanding. I know how frustrating this can be for everyone. So I really appreciate the support. And hopefully it won't be our life for much longer, Jesse. I don't know if I can Zoom the rest of my life. Okay, Aaliyah's back.
Yes, see, this is what happens when you have to do things through Zoom. Yeah. All right.
You sound much better.
Okay, great. Oh wait, you have to put me as host so I can share my screen again.
Yep, give me 1 second.
Sorry about that, y'all.
All right, you're co-host now.
Awesome. Okay, so let's. Okay. All right, so what does comprehensive sexuality education mean, right? So right now, I'll just kind of briefly go through this slide, and if I need to touch up a little more, elaborate more, I will. So comprehensive sexuality education is K through 12, so kindergarten through 12th grade. It's age appropriate, and this is a big thing that I want to stress because age appropriate is very important. A lot of things that I've seen, a lot of media coverage that I've seen on this bill, especially when it's spreading misinformation, is that what we're advocating for is for kindergartners to be learning about the mechanics of sex. And that is completely inaccurate and something that we would never advocate for. Age appropriate means it's based off of childhood development. It's based off age. So they will only learn things that they should learn based off the age that they are, as well as the grades that they are in. So I just want to stress that too, because I know it's a big thing that concerns a lot of people, which is understandable and inclusive. What I like to say is that it is intentionally inclusive. And so what that actually means is that it's not saying that, oh, we're inclusive because what we did was have one simple activity or one lesson about, let's say, for example, LGBTQ young people, right? Whether it's giving different definitions of pronouns, and a lot of people like to say, oh, that is inclusivity. It is not. As it stands right now, a lot of sex education curriculum is very heteronormative, right? It's very centered around heterosexual relationships, and that is a problem. When I have taught sex education, a lot of young people have come up to me and said, like, well, this information does not work for me. I don't see myself in what you're teaching. So, they're not going to listen. And so for me as a sex educator, that changes my perception. That has changed my perception. And this happened years ago, to also making sure to include and be very intentional about what I say, the language that I use, right? So that all young people feel like, oh, this actual information is to help me, because this information is to help everyone, right? It should be medically accurate. So, and that's, you'll see more so medical accuracy when we're talking about lessons within like reproduction and puberty and anatomy, you actually using medical and scientific terms, right? Our hope is that it is taught by actual health teachers. However, if many people might not know, and a lot of New York schools in particular, and I know for me, I know more specifically about New York City schools, health is not necessarily taught by a health teacher. Sometimes it is taught by the math teacher. I've seen, science teacher, other people who are not necessarily certified in health. And I always thought that was such an interesting thing. For everything else needs to be taught by somebody who's certified in that subject. But for something like health, which should be deemed of a very high importance, just like math and science, the person who's teaching it doesn't necessarily have to be certified in that subject, which is problematic in a lot of ways, right? But that's what comprehensive sexuality is. What it is not is abstinence only. Comprehensive sexuality education absolutely teaches abstinence, and absolutely believes that abstinence is the only 100% effective way, right, to prevent pregnancy or prevent a sexually transmitted infection. However, we also understand that not all young people are going to be abstinent, which is why it's really, really important to be able to have these conversations with them about how to, make informed decisions about their bodies. And like I said before, it is not heteronormative, because not all young people or within, that particular, realm. And so it's really important to make sure that we are building curriculum, or that the curriculum emphasizes all identities, right? It's also not based on opinions. And we're going to talk a little bit about why this is important in a minute, because I'm going to go a little in depth about a report that we did, New York Civil Liberties Union did in 2012, and what it showed about some curriculum that was being taught in New York State. Does anyone have any other questions about what comprehensive sex is? Any questions or things that they might have heard, and they might want me to either verify this is the case or not? If not, we can just continue on, but I want to make sure anyone has any questions or anything like that before we continue. All right, awesome. Why is it actually really important? So young people fare better when they have comprehensive sexuality education. So it shows that it has lower rates of HIV, STIs, and unplanned pregnancy. It also actually delays the first sexual experience. And also studies have proven that young people, or people who actually are taught comprehensive sexuality education, have fewer sexual partners. They are also more likely to use a condom or other kind of birth control or contraceptive. And also overall better academic performance, because they're not stressed and worrying about different health issues, because they understand how to make those decisions about their bodies and how to keep themselves safe, right? And young people really do need trusted adults to talk about sex and sexuality. You know, I understand the importance of having a parent, guardian, or caregiver to actually have that conversation. What I always like to stress, though, too, is that not all young people have a parent or caregiver or guardian to have that conversation. And not all parents or guardians are willing to have that conversation with young people, right? With their children. And so if a young person is deciding to try to make different decisions about their bodies, about relationships, and they don't have a reputable place to turn to get this information, this is where a lot of issues come in. They often go to friends who may not have the correct information, right? They go to the internet, and even though there are great websites that actually provide medically accurate information, there are also numerous websites that don't. And if a young person doesn't know which one to believe, they'll just click on the one that they see. And if that information is incorrect, now they have incorrect information, and they're basing decisions based off of this wrong information, right? And this is why it's really important for comprehensive sex ed to be taught in schools, because we cannot put this blanket over all young people. If a young person has a parent or a guardian who's willing to have that conversation with them, and they're able to have that relationship where they can have that conversation, that is awesome. But like I said before, not all young people have that ability. They do not have, that support. And so I think it's important for us to not cherry pick. We can't cherry pick which kids or which young people actually get sex education, which don't base off of information we think we might have, right? So this is why it's really important for this bill to be passed so that all young people be able to get the sexuality education they actually deserve. And like I said before, we're also going to go into what age appropriate means, because I know that can be a concern for parents. It's a concern for electeds as well, what we mean by age appropriate and what younger people, younger children are actually going to learn. And we're going to talk about that too. I also do want to stress too that it has been shown in recent studies that if a young person has been taught comprehensive sexuality education, that it reduces their instance of being sexually assaulted in college by 50%. This is a roughly smaller study that was recently done, but if that is, if this continues to be studied and that continues to be the case, I think that really gives a strong argument of why comprehensive sex ed actually should be taught and why it's so important, because it can actually do that and not just reduce sexual assault, instances of sexual assault, but also can reduce people who actually perpetrate sexual assault, right? Because if you're learning the basics of what we're talking about, the foundation, which is consent, you understand not just how to say no, but other people also understand the signs of no, and they also understand, oh, this is someone's boundary, I'm not going to cross it, because they learn that. For me, when I've taught sex ed with a lot of young people, they're confused about consent. To them, it's a very gray area. I've had a young person come to me. We were in a classroom, and a young woman, she spoke to me and she was like, and she told me a particular story. She was with a partner, and they started beginning to be intimate, but she really wasn't interested. She didn't want to do it, but she was like, well, I had to just continue with it, right? Because I was there, I went to their house, and even though I didn't want to and I didn't feel comfortable anymore, I had to continue. And as I continued to look out the room, everyone was shaking their head, yes. Oh yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, absolutely not. So a lot of young people, we think, oh, they would know the signs of someone like not being uncomfortable. They would understand what a no looks like. And sometimes no's are not an outright yelling no. It can be someone's body language and someone's maybe not looking at you. All of a sudden they're not speaking anymore. Like, you need to be able to also know how to ask, are you okay? Is this okay? And sex education also not increases, but develops those skills within young people so they can have those conversations. So all this being said, why is this even important, right? we would think that in New York, you know, it's known as a progressive state in a lot of ways, but where they consider in sex education, they fall very short. So in New York State, the law only requires 1 semester of health in middle school and 1 in high school. So they don't necessarily require sex education. And the fact that they really only require 1 semester in high school and 1 semester of health in middle school, that's still not enough just for health education in general. But the fact that they do not require sex education is really problematic as well. So, like I said before, NYCLU, New York Civil Liberties Union, came out with a report, also called Birds, Beasts, and Bites, in 2012. And what they did is that they were able to gather curriculum, sex education curriculum from throughout the state to see what is being taught, what are the people teaching the children, right? And so what they found was that a lot of lessons on reproductive anatomy and basic functions were often inaccurate and incomplete. Moral overtones and shame-based messages regarding sexuality, abstinence, pregnancy, and teen parenting strongly pervade instruction materials on all districts and textbooks in wide use across New York State. And I'll give one example of the shame-based messaging. And this is not me making this up. This is actually something some teachers were teaching in certain schools. So there was an activity they were using that was comparing a young woman losing their virginity to a chewed piece of gum or a used piece of tape. And so they were just like, oh, if you lose your virginity, look, you think someone's gonna wanna have it, look at this tape. They make them mess up the tape and said, this is basically what you're doing if you're deciding to have sex. And so that does not stop a young person from having sex. What it does, like I said, is shame them. And then they realize, okay, I have no one I can talk to about it. And so they don't talk about it, right? And I think that's really, really important to understand that this is what's going on, and it's shameful and it's very stigmatizing to a lot of young people, and they need the proper information. No one says that someone has to believe that, oh yeah, all young people need to be having sex. That's not what comprehensive sex education is about. It is understanding that there are young people who will be having sex, right? And that they need to understand all the valuable information that they need to be able to make informed decisions about their bodies and about relationships. We can't expect them to be able to be adults, right? With all this knowledge about how to have healthy communication and tell your partners, I'm not comfortable with this, if we don't teach them when they're young. It doesn't magically happen when they turn 18 or 21, whichever the age someone might feel like, oh, that might make more sense, right? It doesn't magically happen. They need to know it at a younger age. They need to know it earlier, okay? And so also, a lot of students did not learn the full range of methods for preventing pregnancy or sexually transmitted infections, which is also an issue because, like I said before, if a young person is going to decide to have sexual intercourse, they need to know the ins and outs. They need to know how to prevent, unplanned pregnancy or sexually transmitted infections to protect themselves and protect their partners. Also, what it found was that most districts did not teach information about bullying, and many did not teach about sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. And this is a big issue because in a lot of schools, they have a real big issue with sexual assault and sexual harassment in schools. And this is a missed opportunity for New York schools to be able to teach this. And comprehensive sex ed also teaches that as well. It also showed that LGBTQ students are ignored in health curriculum. And like I said previously, this is an issue for all young people, but more specifically for LGBTQ students, right? Because of the fact that if they do not see themselves in this curriculum, they basically completely tune out and you're like, okay, this is not for me. And now they are not safe and they do not know how to make informed decisions about their bodies and their relationships. And that's unfortunate. And all young people deserve to be able to have this information to keep themselves safe. Does anyone have any questions about this? Like what's happening in New York? There you go. All right. So these are just some examples of the actual curriculum that we recovered. So this really was showing, I guess the image on the left is an inaccurate progression of what HIV/AIDS does. And we have to think about the fact that we got this in 2012. And everyone should know by now that this is not how the progression of like HIV and AIDS goes at this moment, because we see that now there's numerous new medication, right? And other ways, other forms to help prevent HIV as well. And all this really does is a scare tactic to make sure young people don't have sex. And even though a shame-based and scare tactics could work in the short term, it might scare a young person for a little while not to have sex, right? It doesn't actually work in the long term. It's been proven time and time again that shame-based and sex scare tactical education, as well as abstinence-only education, does not work to delay young people from having sex, and then it also doesn't give them the proper information, right? Also, right here we see on the right them talking about blood transfusions. I have absolutely no idea why we're still talking about the fact that blood transfusions can pass HIV when that went out the window in the 1980s. They have, obviously been able to have all the scientific, innovation for that to not even be an actual issue now. And so this is why it's an issue too, because now you have young people possibly still maybe now who learned this, in 2012, believing that a blood transfusion can pass HIV, at least not in this country, right? You might see that in other countries perhaps, but the fact that this is in New York where that's not a possibility of happening is problematic. So you see information is inaccurate. Also, this is just some examples of some of the gendered stereotypes that they would show. So we have the male brain, and as you see, like the brain has sex is a huge big quadrant in the brain. We have, attention span is very small. Lame excuses is quite big. Ability to drive a manual transmission. I guess toilet aiming cell is very, very minuscule as well. For female brain, need for commitment is quite big as well. I mean, basically, the female brain encompasses need for commitment, telephone skills, right? Jealousy, listening, shopping. The chocolate center is also a big part. I didn't realize all these parts were parts of the brain. But the problem with this is that someone might always is funny, but then the problem with this is always also does is perpetuate gender stereotypes. And like I said, some of this might be a little more like a ha-ha thing, but like I said before, it does that. But then also, like we saw previously, it just gives flat out inaccurate information. And this is why it's super problematic for young people to actually get this information. If we're going to teach sex education, it needs to be taught correctly, right? It needs to be taught right. So that's where we get into talking about the legislation, which is what's happening right now. So this bill just got reintroduced this legislative session. We have Assembly Member Kathy Nolan, who is actually should be 6616 for the bill, Assembly bill, but Kathy Nolan is a sponsor in the Assembly, and Senator Samara Brooke is the sponsor in the Senate. And so I'll read this off and then I'll talk a little bit more about the legislation as well. So comprehensive sexuality education covers critical topics, including consent, healthy relationships, accessing health services, and the use of technology in social media and intimate relationships. This bill will provide comprehensive sexuality education for students in grades K through 12, which addresses age and developmentally appropriate physical, mental, emotional, and social dimensions of human sexuality, and reflects the national sexuality education standards. So this bill is going to require public and charter schools to teach comprehensive sexuality education in grades K through 12. That, if this bill were to pass, that is what it would do. And it's important to talk about the last line when it says National Sexuality Education Standards. This is really important. This bill would have curriculum be created. Well, it's different. There's different options, right? One is for the Commission of Education and the Commission of Health to create a model curriculum, right? And so that particular model curriculum would be based off of National Sexuality Education Standards, which are guidelines that were created by organizations and many different stakeholders who are very well versed and very well known in like sexual health and sexual education, right? And so it's really important to understand it's not just the people who write the bill or even anyone else who's going to set what the standards are. These are based off of standards that have already been set, right? What's also important to understand too is that schools have choice. As long as the curriculum follows those standards, a school could create a curriculum that works more towards whatever ethnic, racial, demographic that they may have, or religious demographic, whatever demographics that are unique to that school. They can create a curriculum that is unique to those demographics as long as they follow those National Sexuality Education Standards, right? They can also decide to use the model curriculum, or they can decide to utilize evidence-based curriculum that's already been created that is based off of these standards, and they can utilize that in schools too. So I think it's also important for schools to know and teachers to know that it's very flexible. This bill is very flexible because it understands that it's not, one curriculum does not fit all, because one area in New York this curriculum may not fit that area, but it can fit another, right? So it's really important for, like I said, for you all to understand, but for schools and teachers to understand that this bill is very flexible to what the curriculum would be, as long as it fits those standards, right? Any questions about the bill? I'm going to also now kind of go into what K through 12 would learn. But any questions particularly about this bill before we move on? All right. What is actually going to be taught in comprehensive sexuality education? Now, this is just a brief synopsis of it, but this is what I'm talking about when we're saying national standards, right? So in K through 2, we're talking about them learning basic anatomy, bodily autonomy, friendship, consent, and communication. They'll learn other things, but this is what the building blocks would be like in K through 2, okay? In grades 3 through 5, we're talking about reproduction, puberty, HIV and STIs, sexual orientation and gender identity, media portrayals, and healthy relationships. 6 through 8 is sexual intercourse, pregnancy prevention, abstinence, HIV/ST. Oh, sorry. Let's make sure I say the acronyms. HIV, as well as sexually transmitted infection prevention. Refusal skills, like how to talk to your partner about, whether or not you're gonna have sex. You can learn refusal skills about sexual consent, and also just other ways in which to use refusal skills within healthy communication, healthy relationships, and violence prevention, right? And then 9 through 12, we're talking about human sexual response cycle, decision-making around sexual activity, reproductive rights, HIV and sexually transmitted infection testing and treatment. And also what's really important to note is that previous topics in grades will also be discussed in the grades after, right, in subsequent grades. Things about like consent will continue to be something that they talk about. Consent and communication, bodily autonomy will be learned throughout K through 12. Right? It was something that will be continued to be mastered throughout those grades, and something that is going to be the building blocks for everything else that they learn. Okay. And like I said before, like there's the lessons and things like that can be tailored to the school community and what the demographics are. And like I said, this is just a small snapshot, but this is what we mean by age appropriate. A kindergarten is not going to be learning about condoms. They're not going to be learning about, sex. They're going to be learning about how to, know what their body parts are. They're going to know how to tell someone whether or not they want to be touched. They're going to learn how, to talk about friendship and how to have great communication with your friends and with others, how to tell someone how you feel. And also within bodily autonomy, you're gonna learn about consent, asking someone else what their boundaries are. Like, hey, is it okay? Like I said before, get a hug or a high five. Learning those steps about how to talk, ask somebody if it's okay to be in their personal space helps them when they're older, right? To be able to have the conversations about sexual consent, okay? These are all the building blocks to build up to really being able to have those other conversations when they're, in the older grades in middle school and high school. Any questions about national standards, anything that I just discussed now? Okay. Let's talk about some beliefs and misconceptions. So I'm just going to read a statement, and I guess if anyone has, like maybe say they've heard it before, or even if you feel like maybe you believe that, or believe that to be true, I kind of just now want to open it up to everyone else to like kind of have like a brief discussion as well. Also, within this, if you also have any additional questions, this is this last 15 minutes is the time where we can just now have a discussion with each other, right? So comprehensive sexuality education encourages young people to have sex. So does anyone believe that to actually be true? Has anyone actually heard that before, that sex education encourages young people to have sex? I'm interested to hear if anyone's heard that before or not. If you want to tap in the chat too, that's fine. Okay, so someone said, people said no. Okay, yeah, well, that's kind of cool. As people like, no, they have not heard that, which is nice, because that tends to be, and oh yes, and you said misconception, yes, and that does tend to be a misconception that a lot of people have about comprehensive sexuality education that encourages young people to have sex, and that is complete myth. Comprehensive sex ed does not encourage young people to have sex. What it really does is just provide them with the information to make informed decisions. That's flat out, that's what it is. Comprehensive sex ed doesn't even teach the mechanics of sex. What it does is like, okay, if you want to prevent pregnancy, you can utilize these tools. If you want to prevent contracting a sexually transmitted infection, you can utilize these tools, right? Not, this is how you have sex. That's not what that is about, and that's not what would be taught either. Okay, let's do the next one. Comprehensive sexuality education should be the responsibility of parents and families. Does anyone agree that it should just be the responsibility of parents and families? It's a joint effort, yes. I like that, yes, it's a joint effort. That's all I respond. Yes, I love it, yes. Yeah, I see that too. Exactly. You're talking about not being an expert. And I think that's why it's so important. And I do believe that it's absolutely a joint effort. Parents and guardians, caregivers have to be in that conversation with the teachers, with the schools, about how do we, make it so that we can each have these conversations. Because if parents are not on board, then it becomes harder, one, also for schools to be able to teach it. And like, let me make sure. And like, yes, like Christine said, sometimes you're not an expert. And so you're uncomfortable. You're kind of uncomfortable having that conversation because you're like, well, how do I start that? How do I have that conversation if I don't know everything? And so this is why it's important just to have someone like a teacher or someone who's certified in sex education to actually give those that information, right? Because they know the ins and outs of comprehensive sexuality education. They know the ins and outs of possibly some of the questions that young people will ask. And then also it can just be like, if you want to know more, here are more resources. Ask the health teacher if they're teaching sex education, they're teaching it in your school. Well, what's the curriculum you're using? You also, you all might know, but you have the power to go to the school and ask if they're teaching sex ed in your school. What's the curriculum you're using? I'd like to see it. And they have to show it to you. So, being able to get that information, like, oh, can I see this? For you to also maybe start reading up on it as well to get more well-versed on what your child is being taught. And then also for you to be able to start having those conversations as well. But it's absolutely a joint effort. It's neither one or the other. But like I said before too, some young people unfortunately do not have a parent or guardian to have that conversation with, which is why it's really important for this bill to get passed so that it can require all schools to teach it, to just make sure that all young people are able to actually get that information. Yes, I agree with what Jesse said. Also, that it's good tomorrow not knowing and finding the right information. Absolutely. Absolutely. So comprehensive sexuality education should not be taught to young people. This I get a lot. This I get a lot. Yeah. And as you know, we talked about, and I think the biggest reason why is because of the earlier misconception that they're going to be learning all kinds of things that are not based off of their, development, based off their age, and that's not true, right? We talked about what K through 2 is going to learn, right? Those in 3rd to 5th grade are going to learn, and nowhere in there is really talking about sex, any capacity yet, right? They learn the building blocks, and then they're going to get into those deeper conversations about those topics as they get older, right? Which is really how it should be, okay? And comprehensive sexuality education disregards values and morals. What do people think? Do we think it disregards values and morals? Yeah, no, it doesn't. Yeah. So I think this happens a lot because, and some people feel like there is not a war, but they can be an issue when it comes to values and morals, in the sense that, or people's opinions, that it can be an issue because if someone's beliefs or values are that you should not have sex until marriage, teaching a young child or their children about sex or about sexuality and how to protect themselves can seem like it is in direct conflict with their values, right? But what's important to note too about comprehensive sexuality education is that it actually talks to young people and says, think about what your families are talking to you about. Think about what your parents are saying. What kind of values, what belief systems, what beliefs are your parents, embedding in you? And think about how that works, one, for your life, and then also the decisions that you want to make. It is in no way saying, oh, well, yeah, we get that someone might think that, but we don't agree. Has nothing to do with that. It actually really tries to make sure that young people start to understand what their values are and what belief systems, and also to help respect other people's values and beliefs, right? Especially when you're talking about when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to sex, all those different things. And I think that's important to note too, because of people's beliefs about how it can come in conflict, and it can, right? But the education of the curriculum wouldn't outright say, don't listen to your parents or what their beliefs or what they've instilled in you. It absolutely does not. It actually makes them think about those things as well. Yes, we have about 7 minutes. So I kind of also now want to leave it open. Does anyone have any questions, any comments about anything that we talked about today? And then I kind of just do like a closing, and I guess that'll be it for the evening.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering about integrating conversations about the patriarchy, possibly, and about the building of our identities as they fit the heteronormative, but like naming it and bringing that up as part of this conversation. Does that come up at all? Do you? Would you have anything on that?
I would say, as far as and the thing about it could come up if someone has individually created curriculum for that, right? Like standard curriculum you might see probably won't talk about like patriarchy, which they should, and how it kind of establishes what you're talking about. But this is where also it comes in where the bill is so important too, because it allows flexibility, right? For people to be able to have those conversations, to create those lessons, and not just have to follow certain lessons that they feel like you have to do. You have the flexibility to create lessons that, like I said, as long as it follows the standards of being like medically accurate and all those different things, you can have lessons or different activities that a school can create that they feel like actually also holds true to be able to have those conversations as well. I know there are a lot of different like sex educators also who are really paving the way to be able to do the intersection between like race and like sexuality education too, because that's not really talked about. Like what you're talking about, which though it should be, that's not a conversation that's automatically happening because people don't necessarily always see that there's an intersection between the two.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any questions? Any further comments?
I'm not totally sure what my question is, but I had a interesting interaction over Zoom with some middle schoolers today, and I'm new in, or I'm fairly new in these relationships, and it was like it was like a group of 5, and one of them said something really inappropriate, kind of out of left field, sexual, and so I was just like, I think I handled it okay, but I'm just like thinking about, especially in like these challenging Zoom settings where like a lot of the kids have their cameras off, I can't really like read how affected certain people may have been. And so like I know like, you know, it's important to check in outside of that setting. But another thing is just like, I'm just like the child who said the inappropriate thing. Like I know she's really exploring like what her sexual life looks like. And just like trying to figure out like how to like not shame her, but make it clear that whether or not something is school appropriate. But then also I feel like that is just like a heady thing, like defining what is school appropriate. So I definitely was like a little brain frazzled this afternoon by that. Yeah.
And that makes sense though, because if you're not necessarily talking about comprehensive sex education, or that's not the lesson, like if someone, you know, if a young person decides to like say something that catches you off guard, that makes complete sense to, you know, be frazzled and wonder what, you know, the correct thing to say is, or what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. But I think that it's important for people to be able to understand the boundaries in certain classrooms, because I think that's important. And also like to know like, okay, if this person said this, maybe they need more, like maybe they want to know more. And maybe that's the thing too, is like, oh, is there any particular reason why, you know, you said that? Is it something you just wanted people to know? Like there's ways, because sometimes, you know, like I'm pretty sure obviously know, sometimes there's different reasons why young people say what they say. And sometimes it's like, oh, maybe they want to know more about it, or maybe they just wanted to do shock value. And I think sometimes the big thing is to know what was the reason for the outburst or the comment in the first place. Because even when I teach like sex education, I've had people, like young people, say maybe some off the wall things, but I never make it seem like it's off the wall. But that's just because of it's a topic I'm teaching, right? You're not teaching that, so that's why it's a little different. But also why it's so important, you know, to have either a teacher who is like a health teacher who's really into that, or someone else that they can speak to. Like if you're like, okay, let me like you said, you had like a one-on-one conversation with them, and maybe there's something else more that they maybe need to know more information about something as well, and to have that resource in the school, or for all teachers to have at least basic information too, so they can figure out like how to, you know, have those conversations as well. But obviously, like, it's not going to happen in every classroom setting, and that's not necessarily should either.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I think also you brought up something that made me proud of myself, which is like you said, you try to like to not act like it's a big deal when that kind of thing comes up. And Zoom, I think, has been good training for me for that, because I can see my face. And I think that I had my face under control. But thank you. That was really helpful.
Oh, absolutely. No problem. So yes, so it's 7 o'clock. I don't want to take up, you know, any extra time. What I just want to say is, you know, thank you all so much. This is my information. If anyone maybe has any further questions that they want to ask me, but I really do just want to thank you all. Actually, I'll do it for 2 seconds and I'll stop sharing in a minute. But I do want to thank you all for, you know, getting on the Zoom this evening, giving me an hour of your evening, and for us to have this conversation. And for me, I'm really hopeful that, you know, this sex ed bill can actually be passed. I'm crossing my fingers that it will be this legislative session. But if not, we're going to keep striving to, you know, to advocate for it. And if you feel so inclined that it's something that you feel like you want to do too, the thing that I would ask is to, if you know who your elected official is, you know, call them and tell them that you support this bill. And that's pretty much the biggest ask that I can give right now, because it's already been introduced, to get more legislators signed on to this. But like I said, I really want to do it. Thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be calling those people.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bill
please.
passed.
Yes, please. Let them know you want it.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.